I don't know I'm going to be tall because my mother is 5'2", my father is 6'2". But as I started going to school, I was bigger than all the kids.
Andre the Giant was bigger than anyone could imagine, a giant in wrestling and a star in the world. But behind the fame and cheering crowds, his life was full of pain, sickness, and constant struggles. His huge size gave him fame and chances, but it also brought loneliness, endless health problems, and feeling stuck in a body he could not control. While everyone watched and cheered, his private life quietly fell apart, leaving hurt that no one saw. But what about the woman closest to him, his wife, Jean Christensen? How did she face the sadness, the hard times, and the shocking end of a man everyone loved, but few really understood? Join us in this video as we discuss the details. The awful and tragic ending of Andre, the Giant, and his wife. By the time the 1980s arrived, Andre the Giant was no longer seen as just another wrestler. He was something bigger. He was a living attraction. He was a sight that people paid just to witness. When he walked into an arena, fans did not simply watch him wrestle. They stared. They pointed. They tried to understand how one human being could be that large. He felt less like a man and more like a monument standing in the middle of the ring. He had been born in northern France and grew up on a small farm. Farm life is usually simple and steady. It follows the rhythm of the land. But nothing about Andre was simple or steady. From a young age, he grew at a shocking pace. By the time he was 20 years old, he stood 7 feet tall, and his body was still growing. Clothes did not fit. The beds were too small. Cars were impossible to enter without pain. Even ordinary rooms seemed built for someone else. At that age, he made a decision that changed everything. He left the quiet farm and moved to Paris. In the city, he found wrestlers. He found promoters. He found people who looked at his size not as a problem, but as a gift. He began wrestling with the image of a giant lumberjack from the French countryside. It was simple, but it worked. Crowds were amazed. They had never seen anyone like him. Soon, he was traveling across Europe and then to Japan. Fans filled arenas just to see him stand in the ring. His size alone sold tickets. Promoters realized that if his name was on the poster, seats would fill quickly. In 1973, Vince McMahon Sr. brought him to the United States. He was given the name Andre the Giant and presented as a global attraction. He was sent from one wrestling territory to another, night after night, city after city. The business plan was simple: bring in the giant, sell out the building, move on to the next town. But while the crowds cheered, doctors delivered news that was heavy and frightening. Andre's size was not just natural growth. It was caused by acromegaly, a hormonal disorder linked to a tumor on his pituitary gland. His body was producing too much growth hormone. That is why he kept growing. That is why his hands were so large and his bones so thick. Doctors warned him that without surgery, he would likely die before turning 40. He refused surgery. He feared that an operation might change how he looked. He feared it could weaken him. More than anything, he feared losing wrestling. Wrestling was not just his job, it was his identity. Without his size, who would he be? Without the crowds, what would he have? As the years passed, the travel grew harder. Airplane seats were torture. Even when he had more than one seat, the pain did not disappear. His knees hurt. His hips ached. His back began to fail him. Other wrestlers used strong pain medication, but Andre stayed away from those pills. He worried about addiction. Instead, he turned to alcohol. It dulled the pain. It quieted the fear. It gave him a few hours of relief when his body felt like it was breaking from the inside. In 1979, he met Jean Christensen. They had a daughter named Robin. For a short time, there was hope that he might build something steady and warm outside the ring, but his life was always on the road. Shows in different states, tours in different countries. His daughter later said she saw him only a handful of times in her entire childhood. He called her. He made sure she was cared for. But he was rarely there in person. That distance weighed on him deeply. The man who could connect with thousands of strangers each night could not fully connect with his own child. His health continued to decline. Doctors found fluid around his heart and again pushed for surgery. He still refused. Meanwhile, his wrestling career continued to expand. In 1982, Vince McMahon took control of the company and began expanding it across the country. Andre signed an exclusive contract. He became one of the highest-paid stars, but the schedule became even more demanding. There were fewer breaks, less rest, more travel. In 1985, he appeared at WrestleMania 1. The event was a turning point for wrestling. The following years pushed him even harder. His back pain became constant. Standing upright requires effort. Walking was exhausting. By 1987, before his match at WrestleMania 3 against Hulk Hogan, he had undergone back surgery. Even then, he needed a steel brace under his gear just to stand. More than 90,000 people filled the Pontiac Silverdome to watch that match. It was carefully planned to protect him. When Hogan body slammed him, the crowd exploded. It became one of the most famous moments in wrestling history. But behind the cheers was a man in pain, moving carefully, knowing his body was reaching its limits. The giant still stood tall in the ring, but inside, the foundation was beginning to crack. As the cheers grew louder and the spotlight burned brighter, one painful question remained hanging in the air. What happens when a giant who built his life on strength and size can no longer trust his own body to carry him? Keep watching for more. The slow fall, the silence, and the final goodbye. After the glory of WrestleMania 3, things did not become easier. They became harder. In early 1988, Andre defeated Hulk Hogan to win the championship. But the victory was brief. The title changed hands almost immediately as part of the storyline. It was a symbolic win, not a lasting one. His role in the company began to shift. His body could no longer do what it once did. Movements that were once simple became slow and painful. Rising stars began defeating him quickly, including the Ultimate Warrior. For fans who had grown up believing Andre was unbeatable, these fast losses were shocking. For Andre, they were humiliating. He had once been the unstoppable force. Now he was being flattened in seconds. In 1989, at the Survivor Series event, he was eliminated in under half a minute. The image was painful. He grew frustrated. On one occasion, after a difficult performance, he shoved a cameraman who came too close. Anger was replacing patience. His body felt like a prison, and there was no escape. To protect him, he was placed in a tag team called the Colossal Connection with Haku. Haku did most of the wrestling. Andre stood in the corner, waiting for brief moments to step in. At WrestleMania 6, they lost the tag team titles. After that, his full-time career was essentially over. Vince McMahon urged him to stop wrestling. From Vince's point of view, it was about health and safety. From Andre's point of view, it felt like rejection. Wrestling was his life. Being told to step aside felt like being erased. Their once close relationship became strained. Eventually, they stopped speaking altogether. In 1992, Andre made a brief appearance for World Championship Wrestling at Clash of the Champions 20. It was not a match. It was a short cameo honoring legends. Still, it carried meaning. It would be his final televised appearance. The fact that it was not with the company that had built its empire around him caused quiet regret. After that, Andre returned to his ranch in North Carolina. For the first time in his adult life, there were no constant tours, no bright lights, no roaring crowds. Mornings were spent feeding horses and cattle. Afternoons were quiet. He would sit and watch the trees move in the wind. The giant who had always been on display was finally alone. But peace was mixed with sadness. He drank heavily. He ordered small gadgets and trinkets from television shopping channels. The house is filled with objects, but objects cannot replace people. He spoke often with his daughter Robin on the phone. He carried deep regret for missing her childhood. In late 1992, they had a final Christmas call. He told her he loved her. He said they would see each other soon. In January 1993, he traveled to France for his father's funeral. He stayed longer than planned to spend time with his mother for her birthday. The streets of his youth were quieter now. The farm boy who had once outgrown every doorway had become a global legend. Yet, in those final days, he was simply a son walking beside his mother. On January 28, 1993, in a hotel room in Paris, André the Giant died quietly in his sleep. He was 46 years old. The years of strain, the untreated condition, and the endless pressure had finally taken their toll. His ashes were scattered across his North Carolina ranch, the one place where he had felt calm and unseen. The late Hulk Hogan delivered the eulogy. Vince McMahon paid for the funeral. 2 months later, the Wrestling Hall of Fame was created, and André became its first inductee. He stood alone in that first class, just as he had so often stood alone in life. He had been larger than life. He had carried an industry on his shoulders. Although much of the public focus after the passing of André the Giant centered on his legacy in wrestling and film, it is reasonable to imagine that his death had a deeply personal impact on those closest to him, including Jean Christensen. Losing someone who lived such a large and demanding life likely brought a complex mix of emotions, grief, reflection, and perhaps even a quiet understanding of the health struggles he had faced for years. In the end, he was a man who gave everything to the business, even as it slowly took everything from him. After seeing how he carried an entire industry on his shoulders, one important question remains: what was life really like for the man behind the giant image? Let's delve deeper. The giant behind the fame, strength, struggle, and humanity. André the Giant was one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling. At that time, the company was known as the World Wrestling Federation, which is now called WWE. Wrestling was growing very fast in popularity, and André was one of the main reasons for that growth. He was not just another wrestler. He was special because of his huge size and strong presence. Many people believed he carried the company on his shoulders during its most successful years. André weighed more than 500 pounds and stood much taller than most of the men he wrestled. When he walked into an arena, fans were amazed. His size alone made him different from anyone else. Promoters built big matches around him because people would pay just to see him stand in the ring. He became known around the world and was often called the eighth wonder of the world. His fame was not limited to one country. He traveled across the United States and to many other places, always drawing large crowds. However, his great size came from a serious medical condition called acromegaly. This illness causes the body to produce too much growth hormone. Because of this, his bones continued to grow even when he was an adult. The condition made him very tall and large, but it also changed his face and caused many health problems. While fans admired his size, it also brought him pain and embarrassment. Some people were unkind to him because he looked different. Even though he was famous, he still faced teasing and rude comments. Wrestler Bret Hart once shared that he saw fans insult André when he did not stop to sign autographs. Announcer Gene Okerlund also said that such behavior hurt André deeply. At times, these moments made him very emotional. While fans saw a giant who looked powerful and fearless, inside he was still a man who could feel pain from harsh words. The physical pain he lived with was even worse. His condition placed heavy pressure on his joints, back, and knees. Wrestling also caused more damage over time. Every match required him to fall, lift others, and move a body that was already under strain. Doctors offered treatments that might have helped with the pain. Still, André chose not to depend on strong medicines. Instead, he often drank alcohol to deal with the discomfort. Stories about his drinking became part of his legend. People said he could drink far more than anyone else. In one interview with television host David Letterman, Andre claimed he once drank 117 beers in one sitting. During the filming of The Princess Bride, it was reported that his bar bill reached a very large amount. While many told these stories as funny or amazing, they also showed how much pain he was likely trying to manage. Even so, his role in The Princess Bride showed a softer side of him. In the film, he played a kind and loyal giant named Fezzik. The writer of the movie, William Goldman, believed Andre was perfect for the role. Co-star Cary Elwes later described him as gentle and warm. On set, he was known for being polite and friendly. This movie helped many people see him as more than just a wrestler. They saw him as a kind person with a good heart. In his private life, Andre valued loyalty and close friendships. In his will, he named Jackie Macaulay, Frenchie Bernard, and his daughter Robin. He signed the document using his real name, A. Roussimoff, instead of his famous wrestling name. This small detail showed that there was a difference between the public giant and the private man. To the world, he was Andre the Giant, but to himself and those close to him, he was simply Andre Roussimoff. In the end, his life was both grand and difficult. He helped build professional wrestling into a worldwide success. He entertained millions and became a global icon. Yet behind the fame stood a man living with constant pain, facing unkind words and searching for peace in his own way. His story reminds people that even the strongest and largest figures can carry heavy burdens that others cannot see. If Andre's enormous size and legendary strength made him a global superstar, how did his early life, family, and private world shape the man behind the giant persona? Let's learn more. Andre the Giant. Childhood, family, and private life. Andre René Roussimoff, who the world would later know as Andre the Giant, grew up in a small village in rural France. Even as a child, he was noticeably larger than other kids, and his size made him stand out wherever he went. One story that often gets told is that the famous playwright Samuel Beckett sometimes gave Andre rides to school. This story has been repeated many times over the years, but family members later clarified the facts. The village where Andre grew up did not have a school bus system. All the children had to walk to school. Beckett, who lived nearby, owned a truck. He sometimes used this truck to give rides to local children, including Andre. So while it was not exactly what later stories suggested, the truth was that Andre did have a way to travel to school that saved him from walking long distances every day. When Andre left home to pursue his dreams, he promised his parents that he would come back. He left at the age of 14, a young teenager with big dreams. His father expected Andre to return after a short time, but Andre had other plans. He told his parents that if he made money, they would see him again. But if he did not, they might never see him again. Andre did not return until 5 years later, after he had become successful. By that time, he had become famous and appeared on television. His parents did not immediately recognize him. When he first approached the family home, his mother even closed the door on him. She did not know that the person in front of her was her son. Andre finally spoke to them in Polish, the language they had used at home during his childhood. Only then did they realize that their son had come back. This story shows how much Andre had changed in those years and how different his life had become from the life his parents knew. As a young man, Andre faced another challenge that was connected to his size. In 1965, French law required men over the age of 18 to serve in the military. Andre received a draft notice while visiting his family. During the physical examination, the doctor initially misjudged his size from a distance, but when the doctors saw him up close, it was clear that Andre was exceptionally tall and large. He was quickly declared unfit for military service. His height and size made standard military equipment, like shoes and cots, unusable for him. It was also believed that he would be too tall to fight effectively in the trenches. So Andre's size, which brought him fame and attention, also kept him from serving in the army. Even if the army could have made larger uniforms, his size alone would have made him a poor fit for military work. Later in life, Andre created a private space for himself in the United States. He owned a ranch in Ellerbe, North Carolina, known as the AFJ Ranch. The initials stood for Andre, along with his close friends Frenchie Bernard and Jackie McCauley, who helped run the ranch and cared for the animals while Andre traveled for wrestling. The home and ranch were modified to suit his extraordinary size. Showerheads were raised, and oversized chairs were made so that he could move and sit comfortably. The ranch had Texas Longhorn cattle and several dogs. Andre enjoyed spending time there doing simple things he loved, like riding an ATV while his dogs chased him, eating at the local Dixie Burger, and watching QVC. Although Andre spent most of his life traveling and performing in front of crowds, the ranch gave him a quiet place to relax. He could spend time with friends he had known since childhood. He also found freedom in being away from the public eye. Locals respected his privacy and rarely disturbed him. This private life was very important to Andre. Even as a global superstar, he valued having a home where he could experience some normalcy and comfort. The ranch, the animals, and the friends who shared it with him allowed him to enjoy life on his own terms, in a way that most people never got to see. In these ways, Andre's private life shows a man who, despite being famous and extraordinary, cared deeply about home, friendship, and peace. He found ways to live comfortably despite challenges caused by his size. His family, friends, and the AFJ Ranch all played important roles in helping him maintain a sense of normal life, even while traveling the world and performing in front of thousands. Andre the Giant was not only a public icon, he was also a man who treasured the simple joys of home, companionship, and quiet moments away from the spotlight. After understanding the personal struggles and private life of the man behind the legend, how did his strong sense of respect and discipline shape the conflicts and confrontations he faced inside the wrestling world? Let's delve deeper. Respect, rules, and rising tension. During his long and demanding career in professional wrestling, Andre the Giant built a reputation that went far beyond championships and main events. He was not just a performer inside the ring, he was also a powerful presence behind the curtain. Other wrestlers often spoke about how much influence he carried in the locker room. He did not need to shout or threaten people. His size alone commanded attention. But even more than that, it was his standards that made others take him seriously. Andre believed wrestling was serious work. To many fans, it was entertainment. To promoters, it was business. But to Andre, it was also a craft that required discipline and respect. He believed wrestlers should protect each other in the ring. They needed to trust one another physically. When that trust was broken, even in small ways, he took it personally. One of the clearest examples of this involved Randy Savage. Savage was colorful, intense, and larger than life in his own way. He was known for his bright outfits, wild interviews, and heavy use of baby oil during matches. While the oil gave his muscles a dramatic shine under arena lights, Andre strongly disliked it. From his perspective, oil made matches unsafe. It became harder to grab, hold, or control an opponent properly. For someone Andre's size, who was already dealing with joint pain and physical strain, a secure grip was not optional. It was necessary. Reports say Andre warned Savage more than once. He did not joke about it. He made his position clear: no baby oil. However, Savage continued using it. Whether it was for appearance, branding, or habit, he did not stop. That decision reportedly created tension between the two men. Some fellow wrestlers later claimed that Andre responded by wrestling more roughly during their matches. In wrestling language, this meant he struck harder and applied more force. It was not part of the performance. It was a message. Andre did not speak loudly, but when he felt ignored, he made sure his point was understood. There were also quiet reports that Andre felt uncomfortable with how Savage treated his manager, Miss Elizabeth. While details were never fully confirmed, those around the situation suggested that Andre valued respectful behavior, especially toward women. If he believed someone crossed that line, it would have bothered him deeply. This added another layer to the tension. Another significant moment involved Bam Bam Bigelow. Bigelow entered the company with strong promotion and high expectations. He was presented as a major new star. With that spotlight often comes confidence. However, some backstage figures believed that confidence came across as arrogance. Reports suggest Andre felt Bigelow needed to be reminded of wrestling's unwritten rules. During a match at Madison Square Garden, Andre allegedly struck Bigelow much harder than expected. Observers believed this was intentional. It was described as a lesson rather than an accident. Bigelow later admitted that the experience humbled him. He acknowledged that it helped him grow and better understand the culture of the business. Shortly afterward, his strong push slowed. While no official explanation linked the two events, many connected them. Tension also reportedly grew between Andre and the Fabulous Freebirds. The group had a reputation for lateness and behavior that some considered unprofessional. Andre valued punctuality and respect for the locker room environment. According to accounts shared years later, he confronted the trio directly. Though he did not hold a management title, his influence was enormous. When one member questioned his authority, Andre reportedly delivered a clear ultimatum: either they leave or he would. Soon after, the group was released. Whether every detail is exact or shaped by time, the story reflects how much power Andre carried without needing an official position. These episodes show a pattern. Andre rarely looked for conflict, but when he felt standards were ignored, he responded firmly. His size gave him presence, his status gave him authority, and his beliefs about respect guided his actions. If his authority backstage was built on respect and unspoken rules, what happened when those tensions moved beyond the locker room into real-world consequences? Let's find out. Conflict, consequences, and controlled power. While many of Andre's confrontations happened in locker rooms and arenas, not all of them stayed within wrestling walls. One of the most dramatic stories from his life took place in a Florida bar in the late 1970s. The incident reportedly involved Blackjack Mulligan and Dick Murdoch. According to different versions of the story, tension rose over money. Exactly what happened next depends on who tells it. In one version, Andre physically overpowered both men and dragged them toward the ocean, briefly holding them under the waves before releasing them. In another version, he threw them through a window and placed them inside the trunk of a taxi. As with many stories from wrestling's past, details may have grown larger over time. However, the common theme remains the same. Andre easily won the confrontation. Afterward, he reportedly returned calmly to his drink, as if nothing unusual had happened. These stories reinforced his image as both gentle and dangerous. He did not look for fights, but few people could challenge him physically. His massive frame and natural strength meant that even trained athletes struggled against him. A more serious and documented incident occurred in 1989 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. After a wrestling event, Andre believed a cameraman was filming him without permission. Feeling upset, he confronted the man and damaged the camera equipment. The cameraman later reported bruising and sought medical attention. Police arrived and arrested Andre backstage. Because of his extraordinary size, officers reportedly faced logistical problems. Standard handcuffs did not fit properly. Fitting him into a patrol car was also difficult. The situation attracted attention because it showed how unusual his physical dimensions were, even in a legal setting. In court, Andre was found not guilty of mistreatment. However, he was found guilty of criminal mischief for damaging the camera. The case was later settled. This incident stands apart from backstage rumors because it entered official legal records. It demonstrated that even someone as famous and respected as Andre could face consequences under the law. Despite these conflicts, many colleagues consistently described Andre as patient and kind. They often said he did not lose his temper easily. When he reacted strongly, it was usually tied to respect, professionalism, or personal boundaries. He believed certain lines should not be crossed. When they were, he responded in a way that matched his enormous presence. Taken together, these accounts create a layered portrait. Andre was not simply a giant performer playing a role. He was a man with clear values. He expected discipline. He demanded respect. He protected what he believed wrestling should be. When necessary, he used his strength and status to enforce those beliefs. Behind the legend and the spectacle stood a complex human being. His power was real. His influence was real. And when pushed, his response was just as real. What do you think about the ending of Andre the Giant? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us as we explored the incredible journey of Andre the Giant. If this deep dive gave you a new appreciation for the man behind the legend, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to uncover more amazing stories. See you there.